It started as a regular Friday afternoon. I had just wrapped up work and was heading home, looking forward to a quiet evening. My wife, Emily, had been working fewer hours at the clinic lately. She mentioned needing to pick up some extra shifts here and there, but nothing too out of the ordinary. I guess we were in one of those phases, married for almost 6 years, and the excitement of the early years had given way to routine. Still, I didn't think much of it. You don't go into your day expecting your entire life to be turned upside down. That afternoon, she called me. Her voice was tense. "Hey, can you grab some milk from the gas station on your way home? I forgot to pick it up earlier," she said quickly. Nothing unusual, right? I didn't even think twice about it and agreed. I pulled into the small gas station just a few blocks from our house. One of those old, family-run places that hadn't changed in decades. The moment I stepped inside, I noticed something off. The guy behind the counter, Adam, looked up at me in a way that was hard to describe. I'd seen him a few times before, always polite, nothing strange. But that evening, he had this weird look on his face, like he knew something I didn't. I brushed it off as paranoia and grabbed the milk. But as I walked to the counter to pay, I noticed Emily's favorite candy, those sour gummies she always craved. The empty bag was stuffed in the trash near the register. Strange, I thought. She hadn't mentioned coming here today, and I had no reason to suspect anything. Adam didn't say much, just rang up my items with an odd smirk. I paid and left, but something was gnawing at me. When I got home, Emily was in the kitchen, prepping dinner like usual. I placed the milk on the counter and watched her for a moment, wondering if I should bring up the strange vibe I got from Adam. But I didn't. I convinced myself I was reading too much into it. Little did I know, this was just the first crack in the foundation. Later that night, as we sat down for dinner, Emily was unusually distant. She kept checking her phone and barely touched her plate. I tried making small talk, asking about her day, but her answers were short, almost mechanical. My gut told me something was wrong, but every time I thought about confronting her, I'd push the thought aside. Why would I suspect anything? We'd been through tough times before. We were solid, or at least I thought we were. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind drifted back to the gas station. The sour gummies, Adam's strange look, and Emily's cold demeanor. It all seemed disconnected, like random puzzle pieces that didn't fit. But for some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were somehow linked. If only I had listened to my instincts. If only I had paid more attention that night, maybe I could have stopped what was coming. Maybe I could have prevented the devastation that was about to hit my life like a freight train. The next few days passed in a haze, but that strange feeling wouldn't leave me. Emily's behavior had shifted, but she was still going about her routine. Work, home, occasional visits to friends. But something felt off. I tried to brush it away. After all, we'd been together for years, and this wasn't the first time I'd felt disconnected. But this was different. One night, about a week after the gas station visit, I woke up in the middle of the night. Emily wasn't beside me. I listened carefully, thinking she might be in the bathroom, but I didn't hear any water running. Curious, I got up, groggy and confused, and made my way downstairs. The dim light from the kitchen spilled into the hallway, and there she was, sitting at the table with her phone in her hand. She was smiling. I stood there for a moment, watching her silently. The glow from her phone reflected off her face, and that smile. It wasn't the kind of smile you gave while scrolling through Facebook or reading random texts. It was the kind of smile you gave to someone you cared about, someone you were excited to talk to. "Who are you texting?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Emily jolted, startled, and quickly locked her phone, slipping it into her lap. "Oh, just a group chat with the girls," she said, a little too fast. "They're planning a surprise for one of our friends." I nodded, pretending to believe her, but my heart was racing. Something wasn't right. She got up quickly, gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, and said, "Let's go back to bed." But as I followed her up the stairs, my mind was spinning. If this was just a harmless chat, why did she look so guilty? Why did she hide her phone? Over the next few days, I started noticing more and more odd behavior. Emily was constantly on her phone, but always careful to put it down or lock the screen when I was nearby. She had more errands to run after work and even mentioned picking up some late shifts. I wanted to confront her, but I wasn't sure how to approach it without sounding paranoid. After all, I didn't have proof, just a gut feeling. Then, something happened that made my suspicion skyrocket. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I had taken the day off to do some yard work. Emily had left earlier, saying she was going to help a friend move. As I was trimming the hedges near the front of the house, a car I didn't recognize pulled up across the street. It was an old, beat-up sedan, the kind you'd overlook if you weren't paying attention, but something about it caught my eye. I watched as the driver, a man, sat in the car for a few moments, scanning the street. He was wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, his head low as if trying not to be seen. After a minute or two, he pulled out his phone, dialed a number, and waited. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out to see a message from Emily, running a bit late. Be home soon. The timing was too perfect. I looked back at the car, and the man was still there, his phone now resting in his hand. My heart started pounding in my chest. Could this be the person she was texting late at night? Could this be the reason for all her secrecy? I stood there, frozen, torn between confronting the guy and walking back inside to avoid what I feared might be true. But before I could decide, the car's engine revved, and he pulled away, disappearing down the street. When Emily came home later that evening, she was all smiles, acting like everything was fine. I tried to play it cool, but inside, I was boiling. I wanted to scream, to demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I waited. I knew something was going on, and I needed to figure out exactly what. I couldn't shake the image of that car, of the man sitting there, waiting for something or someone. And I was beginning to feel like I wasn't the only one watching my life unravel. It felt like I was being played, and the person holding all the cards was right under my nose. But still, I needed proof. Confronting Emily without it would only lead to her brushing me off, telling me I was being insecure. So I waited, my stomach in knots, knowing the truth was lurking just around the corner. It was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. And when it did, I wasn't sure I'd be able to handle it. I spent the next few days in a state of quiet observation, paying closer attention to every detail of Emily's behavior. She had no idea I was on to her, and I wasn't about to tip her off. Not yet. I needed something concrete, some undeniable proof that my suspicions weren't just paranoia. That's when I decided to check her phone. Now, Emily had never been one to hide things from me before. We'd always shared passwords, and her phone was usually unlocked and lying around the house. But recently, she had started being more careful with it, locking the screen anytime I walked into the room, keeping it tucked away in her purse, even taking it with her to the bathroom. Still, I figured there might be a moment when she let her guard down. That moment came late one night. She was already asleep, her phone charging on the bedside table. I had been tossing and turning, the weight of everything sitting heavily on my chest. After what felt like hours of lying there, I made my move. Quietly, I reached over and grabbed her phone. My hands were shaking as I unlocked it with the passcode I'd known for years, hoping, praying, that maybe I'd find nothing. Maybe all of this had been in my head, and I was just being insecure like she said. But as soon as I opened her messages, my heart sank. There it was. A whole thread of text between Emily and someone listed only as A. The messages were short but loaded with meaning. Things like, missed you today, and can't wait for tomorrow. Nothing too incriminating yet, but definitely not the kind of things you'd send to a friend. My hands were trembling as I scrolled further. That's when I found it. One message that changed everything. It was from a few days ago, and it read, "See you after my shift. Meet me by the pumps." My blood ran cold. The gas station. Adam. A was Adam. My mind went blank for a second as the reality of the situation sank in. The gas station guy, the one who looked at me with that smirk the other day, he was the one she'd been texting, the one she'd been meeting in secret. I felt sick. The room seemed to spin as I stared at the phone, reading and rereading the messages. How could this be happening? How could she throw away everything we had for some random gas station attendant? We had built a life together, a home, plans for the future, and she was willing to risk it all for him? I scrolled up, desperate to find more, my vision blurry from the mix of anger and heartbreak. There were messages about meeting after work, going for drives, even a vague reference to a weekend they'd spent together while I had been out of town for a work trip. It felt like I had been punched in the gut. She hadn't just been flirting or texting behind my back. This was an affair. Suddenly, it all clicked. The late-night texts, the sudden distance, her frequent errands that always seemed to keep her out longer than they should. Every suspicion I'd had over the past few weeks had been justified. She had been seeing Adam, sneaking around behind my back, while I was at home, none the wiser. I put the phone back on the nightstand, my hands shaking. I didn't know what to do. Should I confront her right then? Should I storm out and leave? A million thoughts raced through my head, but all I could feel was this deep, hollow ache. The woman I had loved and trusted for so many years had betrayed me, and I had no idea how to even begin processing it. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the ceiling, my mind running in circles. By the time the sun started to rise, I hadn't slept a single minute. Emily stirred beside me, completely unaware that everything had changed. She got up, stretched, and smiled at me like it was any other day. "Morning," she said casually, as if she hadn't been living a double life. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Morning." Inside, I was screaming. As she went about her morning routine, I realized I couldn't confront her just yet. Not without a plan. I needed to know everything. I needed to catch them in the act. And so, I did something I never thought I'd do. I began planning how to catch my wife in her affair. It felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life, but I had to know. I had to see it with my own eyes. Little did I know, the confrontation that was coming would turn out to be even worse than I could have imagined. The next few days were torture. Every moment spent with Emily felt like a lie, like I was playing a part in some twisted drama where I knew the ending but couldn't change it. She carried on like nothing had changed, while I walked around with this constant knot in my stomach. I tried to act normal, but every smile she gave me felt like a slap in the face. I decided to follow her. I had never been the type to spy or invade someone's privacy, but at this point, what else could I do? I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed undeniable proof. So, the next time Emily said she was going to run errands, I told her I'd be working late. I waited for her to leave, then grabbed my keys and followed her. She drove to the gas station. I parked a little way down the street, my heart pounding as I watched her pull up to one of the pumps. Adam was there, wiping down the windshield of another customer's car. As soon as he saw her, his face lit up in a way that made me sick. He glanced around, checking to make sure no one was watching, then walked over to her car. They talked for a minute, then Emily got out, glancing nervously around like she knew what she was doing was wrong. My pulse quickened as they both headed toward the back of the gas station, disappearing behind the building. I couldn't see them, but I knew what was happening. The betrayal felt so much more real now that I could physically see them together. It was like a knife twisting in my gut. I waited in the car, feeling utterly helpless. Part of me wanted to charge over there, to confront them right in that moment. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed to gather more. I needed to know how long this had been going on, and more importantly, I needed to figure out what to do next. After what felt like an eternity, Emily emerged from behind the building. She was fixing her hair, looking around nervously before getting back into her car. Adam walked back to the front, the smirk on his face making me want to tear him apart. They acted like nothing had happened, like their secret was safe. But it wasn't. As Emily drove off, I stayed in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. This wasn't just some flirtation. It was physical. It was real. And now that I had seen it with my own eyes, I couldn't unsee it. I followed her home, my mind racing. How could she do this to me? To us? What was I going to do now? I couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine, but I wasn't ready to confront her either. Not yet. The reality of the situation was too heavy to process all at once, so I spent the next few days in a daze. I barely spoke to Emily, and when I did, I kept it short. She didn't seem to notice, or maybe she just didn't care anymore. Either way, things were building towards something, and I could feel it coming. I just wasn't prepared for how soon it would all explode. One afternoon, as I sat in my office pretending to work, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I ignored it at first, but something made me check the voicemail that was left a few minutes later. It was Adam's voice. Hey, I don't know how to say this, but I think we need to talk. Call me back. My stomach dropped. What the hell was this about? Why would he be calling me? I called him back, my hands shaking as I dialed. He picked up on the first ring. Look, man, I know this is weird, Adam started, sounding nervous. But I didn't want things to get out of hand. Emily and it's not what you think. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to stay calm. Not what I think. So you aren't screwing my wife behind a gas station? I said, my voice cold and dripping with sarcasm. There was a pause on the other end. Okay, I guess it is what you think, he admitted, his voice shaking. But it's not. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I think I'm in love with her. The words hit me like a freight train. Love? He loved her? I could feel the anger rising inside me, threatening to explode. You don't love her, I spat. You're just a distraction for her. A fling. I'm not so sure about that, Adam replied quietly. She told me she's unhappy, that you guys are barely talking anymore, that she's thinking about leaving. I couldn't breathe. Leave me? Emily had never mentioned anything about leaving, not even during our recent rough patches. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be happening. I hung up without saying another word. The room spun as I tried to make sense of what I had just heard. Emily was unhappy? Was that why she had turned to him? Was it something I had done, or hadn't done, that had pushed her into his arms? My mind raced through every fight, every cold shoulder, every missed kiss goodbye. But even then, it didn't justify this. None of it did. She had chosen to betray me, and now, she might be planning to leave. I wasn't ready for what came next. That night, I couldn't hold it in any longer. As soon as Emily walked through the door, I felt the words bubbling up inside me. I had rehearsed the confrontation over and over in my head, but nothing could prepare me for the reality of it. She was smiling, as if nothing had changed, as if she hadn't been sneaking around with another man. I couldn't stand it anymore. Who's Adam? I blurted out, my voice harsh. The color drained from her face. Her eyes widened, and for a second, she didn't say anything. That was all the confirmation I needed. Why didn't you tell me you're in love with the guy? I spat, my voice shaking with anger. Emily stammered, trying to find the right words. It's not like that, she started, her voice small. Then what is it like? I snapped. Because from where I'm standing, you've been lying to me. For how long? Weeks? Months? Tears welled up in her eyes, but I couldn't feel sorry for her. Not now. It just happened, she whispered. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't know how to stop. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to do anything to release the rage building inside me. But instead, I just stood there, staring at the woman I thought I knew, wondering how we had gotten here. Are you going to leave me? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. Emily didn't answer right away. She just stood there, biting her lip, avoiding my eyes like she was afraid to say what I already knew. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear her when she finally spoke. I don't know, she whispered. The air seemed to leave the room. How could she not know? After everything we'd built, after all the years we'd spent together, she didn't know if she wanted to stay? I felt something snap inside me. All the anger, the frustration, the heartbreak I'd been holding erupted like a volcano. You don't know? I yelled, the words spilling out uncontrollably. After all we've been through, after all we've built together, you don't know if you're going to throw it all away for him? Emily flinched, her eyes welling up with tears, but I didn't care. She had made her choice the moment she started sneaking around. She had chosen him over me, over us. I never wanted this to happen, she sobbed, her voice shaking. I was so lonely. You were always working, always distracted. I felt invisible. I shook my head, disbelief coursing through me. So your solution was to sleep with the gas station attendant? To lie to me? Do you have any idea how much you've hurt me? She didn't respond. She just stood there, tears streaming down her face, and in that moment, I realized something. She was sorry, but she wasn't sorry enough to stop. She was sorry she got caught. The days that followed were a blur. Emily stayed in the house, but we barely spoke. She slept in the guest room, and every night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how it had all fallen apart so quickly. I started seeing a lawyer. I wasn't ready to file for divorce just yet, but I needed to know my options. I needed to know what I was up against, just in case. The lawyer was sympathetic, but businesslike. She went over everything with me: property division, alimony, custody, though thank God we didn't have kids. It was all so cold, so final. I wasn't ready for it to be over, but I also couldn't imagine staying in this limbo forever. Emily, on the other hand, seemed lost. She didn't talk much, and when she did, it was usually to ask about practical things: bills, groceries, schedules. There was no emotion in her voice, no attempt to fix what had been broken. It was like she had already checked out. One night, after another silent dinner, I finally broke. "Are you still seeing him?" I asked, my voice flat. Emily looked up from her plate, her face pale. "No," she said quietly. "It's over." But I didn't believe her that I knew she was lying. Even though she said it was over with Adam, I could see the guilt in her eyes, the hesitation in her voice. She wasn't telling me the whole truth, and I couldn't live like that. So I decided to confront him. I drove to the gas station one afternoon, my hands trembling on the wheel. As soon as I pulled into the lot, I saw him standing by the pumps, talking to a customer. My stomach twisted in knots, but I couldn't back down now. I had to face him. I got out of the car and walked over, my heart racing. Adam looked up and saw me, his face going pale as he realized who I was. "We need to talk," I said, my voice tight. He nodded, glancing around nervously. "Not here," he muttered. "Let's go around back." I followed him, my mind spinning with everything I wanted to say, everything I wanted to scream at him. But when we got behind the building, all I could do was stare at him, this guy who had taken everything from me. "Why her?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Why my wife?" Adam looked down at the ground, avoiding my eyes. "I don't know, man. It just happened. I never meant to hurt you." I clenched my fists, barely able to control the rage building inside me. "You didn't mean to hurt me?" I spat. "You've destroyed my life. You've taken everything." He didn't respond, just stood there looking miserable, like some helpless victim. And that's when I realized something. He wasn't the villain in this story. Emily was. She had made the choice to betray me. She had lied, not just to me, but to herself. Adam was just the symptom. The real disease was the broken trust between us. After my confrontation with Adam, something inside me shifted. I felt numb, like the shock of the betrayal had finally worn off, leaving me with nothing but cold, hard reality. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. Emily tried to talk to me that night. She sat down beside me on the couch, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Her words felt empty, meaningless. We had passed the point of apologies. "I know you hate me," she continued, her voice trembling, "and I don't blame you. But I don't want to lose you. Please, we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can try." "Do you love him?" I asked, cutting her off. Emily hesitated, her breath catching in her throat. That hesitation told me everything I needed to know. "I don't know," she whispered. That was it. That was my breaking point. I stood up, my heart heavy with the finality of it all. "I'm done," I said quietly. "I can't do this anymore." Emily started crying, but I didn't stay to watch. I walked out of the room, out of the house and into the cool night air, feeling like I had finally made the decision that I'd been avoiding for weeks. I stayed with a friend for a few nights, giving myself space to think. I didn't want to rush into any decisions, but I knew deep down that my marriage was over. There was no coming back from this. I met with the lawyer again, and this time, I was ready to file. We went over the details, division of assets, spousal support, and it all felt so clinical, so removed from the life Emily and I had built together. But I didn't feel sad anymore, just numb. Emily didn't fight the divorce. In fact, she barely reacted when I told her. She cried, of course, But there was no grand gesture, no desperate plea to make things right. She knew it was over too. A few weeks later, the divorce papers were finalized. I signed them with a heavy heart, but also with a sense of relief. The weight of the betrayal had finally lifted, leaving me with the hollow shell of what had once been my life. Emily moved out shortly after that. She didn't take much, just a few boxes of clothes and some personal items. I watched her go, wondering how we had gotten here. How two people who had once loved each other so deeply could end up like this. Strangers, broken by lies and betrayal. The weeks after the divorce were strange. I went through the motions of my day-to-day life, but everything felt different. Empty. The house was too quiet without Emily's presence, and every room reminded me of her, of us, of what we had lost. Friends tried to comfort me, to pull me out of my grief, but it wasn't that simple. How do you move on from something like this? How do you rebuild after your trust has been shattered? I kept to myself for a long time, trying to heal, trying to figure out who I was without her. It wasn't easy, but slowly, life started to feel normal again. IT took months, but eventually, I started to move on. I found new hobbies, reconnected with old friends, and slowly, I began to feel like myself again. I wasn't fully healed, not by a long shot, but I was starting to see a future for myself. One without Emily. I heard through mutual friends that she had moved in with Adam for a while, but that it didn't last. I wasn't surprised. Whatever they had, it was built on lies and deceit. It was never going to survive in the real world. One day, I found myself standing in front of the gas station, the place where everything had fallen apart. I hadn't been back there since the day I followed her. I wasn't sure why I'd come, maybe for closure, maybe just to see if the pain was still there. But as I stood there, staring at the pumps where Emily had met Adam, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. The betrayal still hurt, but it didn't define me. It didn't control me. I turned and walked away, leaving the past behind me, ready to start a new chapter in my life. A chapter where I could finally let go. Because in the end, that's all you can do. Let go, move forward, and hope that someday, the pieces will fall back into place.